Good afternoon, and welcome to our YWCA Facebook Live event. I'm Laura Gomez-Horton, Clinical Director of the YWCA Greater Austin. For those who are unfamiliar, YWCA Greater Austin provides individual, couple, family, and group therapy, care coordination services, life skills classes, consultation, training, advocacy, and we maintain a warm line. We have been in the Central Texas area for over 115 years, and our mission is the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. And we stand at the intersection of mental health and social justice. Today marks the inaugural launch of the new Connect, Heal, Learn speaker series, which are mostly interviews where we are joined by subject matter experts to expand awareness and begin to move forward collectively. These conversations will be held online on the second Friday of each month. Today, we kick off this series with Houston-based visual artist, Jonathan Paul Jackson. Jonathan, today we are honored to be here with you in your studio, and hopefully we'll get to see some of your work in progress too. But for now, in recognition of Black History Month, we will be talking about the importance of acknowledging history and people's lived experiences, as well as how people, in particular artists, might use their abilities and creativity to contemplate their experiences and to heal from the effects of racism, oppression, and other traumatic events. Jonathan, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Number one, thanks for having me. And yeah, totally. So my name is Jonathan Paul Jackson. I'm a Texas native, predominantly based in Houston. I'm a painter, but I kind of dabble in everything as long as I kind of keep it in the rule of as long as I can express myself. I make paintings, installation work. I do photography, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, but yeah, so I mainly focus in painting and trying to examine a lot of like the world around me via my imagination and then putting on a canvas. Yeah.
How long have you been doing this work?
Man, I guess I started making like this particular body of work almost 8 years ago. Or I guess like the body of work, I should say, that like really made me feel like I was a true artist, so to speak. It was intellectual, it had context. Visually, it was like 100% of what I saw in my imagination. So I kind of completed like all three things that I thought would make art, what it's like supposed to make like real art. Yeah, and so I started this about 8 years ago, and just kind of as I've grown as an artist, I've added to it, taken stuff away, added to some more, but it's pretty much predominantly like I would go to, it started me going to art museums with my friends, and me being so, I would just stay in the indigenous department forever. Like the modern art was like pretty cool to me. I had seen it so much, but anytime I got to go to an indigenous wing of an art museum, that's where like I would focus a lot of my energy on. And my friends would go to see the Warhols and the Basquiats and et cetera. But so I was like trying to figure out a way to get my friends and other people to love and to like understand like why indigenous work is so important. So I started kind of researching indigenous work myself, and then trying to apply different type of contemporary mediums, so to speak, to photographs of indigenous work, to not only to show like the differences, but also the similarities in which like contemporary art and work that dates thousands of years ago like so cross-correlate, even though there's been thousands of years have passed. Yeah, and so now it's become probably like some of my favorite stuff to talk about and make, just because each time I make a new body of work for the series, I get to go like deeper and deeper into like African culture and learn more about like my roots and other people's roots and like where all that stuff comes from. And so it's called African Contemporary, and it deals with indigenous like African tribes from thousands of years ago until present day. And I'm just like fascinated with the geometry of the work, the patterns, everything. And so I wanted to like kind of put emphasis on those patterns and the geometry of the sculptures that they make. Yeah. And so once I started like really digging deep into like what the sculpture meaning was, I was able to like put that meaning into like a visual representation onto the canvas with the sculpture itself. And that just like opened up the door a lot. And then I actually I was having trouble like naming the works. And so I decided to just, whenever I use a sculpture work, I put the tribe's name and where they're from in Africa and the year that the years that they were put, the years that they were predominantly in Africa. So in that way, the viewer can Google the tribe's name and like do their own research and fall in love with the sculpture as much as I have.
Wonderful. You said something that struck me a little bit. So you were recalling that you and your friends used to go to the museums, and you were called more into by the indigenous work. At that time, I imagine you were a lot younger then, and going to these museums. I'm curious, like, if you knew what called you from that work.
At the time, I didn't. Like, I just knew that it was just like, this is where I felt like the warmest, quote unquote. Like I understood the work like almost automatically, right? And so I felt, so I just like, I think that's why I was like initially drawn, but like as I got older and started to like kind of study that within myself as an artist, it became more about, because I'm half Black, half white. And so that became more about like my identity and like me trying to figure out like where I came from, and like me trying to figure out where I came from so much that like I naturally just dove deep into all that. Unbeknownst to like me knowing, right. Like I just, and so, at that time I didn't know, but I soon learned later after I studied the work more, and then I studied myself, like psychologically going to therapy and stuff like that. Like I really discovered like where all that stuff came from.
Yeah. And that's why it fascinates me, because it's like from our perspective, or my perspective, connection is so important for people to grow and thrive and heal from past experiences too. So when you said that, I was like, it seemed like the embodiment of, you were just called, something about that area of the indigenous works just called you, and without even realizing it. I think a lot of times people feel that and maybe ignore it, or are told to ignore it, whatever it is that's calling them, where they feel connected emotionally. So I'm glad that you had that experience, and I'm so glad that you have been able to connect more to it. I know you've shared a little bit about your work and everything. What are some things that you're hoping to accomplish? You mentioned that you put the tribe's name and dates, and so people can go and do their own research. What are you trying to accomplish for people?
That's a great question. I think it goes back to this idea of expression and like freedom of expression. And I think that's like why I'm like drawn to the indigenous work a lot as well, is because like that was like the truest freedom of expression ever. There weren't any galleries. Like a lot of people make that stuff just based on the pure need to express themselves. And like, that's why I make art, is like just the sheer need to like, I get up in the morning and I got to make art. If I don't, I get depressed, I get irritable, like I'm not fun to be around, because I'm just, and I'm holding this inside, and I soon learned that like, art therapy is super important, even if you don't show it to anyone or anything, like it doesn't have to go in a gallery, it doesn't have to go on someone's wall, but the idea that you have this outlet to create something, and then you also get this like self-recognition where it's like, yeah, I made that, like, and that's so good for your self-esteem and like your self-worth, to be able to like sit down in front of whatever, clay, a piece of paper, photography, whatever, and say that I made that. It embodies something. It gives you something that like nothing and no one else can, And so I guess like in the long run, like that's what I want people to like get from my work, is that like, it's not perfect, but it's showing the freedom of expression, and everyone has the right and the freedom to express themselves, and I wish more people would, because I think we'd have more people that, a lot like their mental health would be a little bit more better. And so the idea that, whenever I paint, I go outside of the lines and I draw, and my stuff doesn't really look like a leaf, but it's a leaf. And so the idea that like people can look at my work and it's not quite perfect, but it's like, it's perfect to me. And that's kind of what matters. So it's really just about making sure, like, I want people to like explore their imagination and like understand their like right to have a freedom of expression.
Yeah, and what you said is so important too, because that's totally been my experience, is that artists especially, but just people in general, using that creativity and expressing themselves, they can really communicate the emotion that maybe they can't say verbally, for whatever reason. The mind-body connection is just so incredible that it's hard to explain sometimes, but it's not as easy sometimes to say things verbally, especially when people are critical when you do say things verbally, or we've been taught in society not to share our feelings. So sometimes this art, whatever it is, or creativity, and I love how you say, painting outside the lines too, because that's another thing with our society, is that we're told to stay in the lines, and that constricts people so much. So I'm glad that you point that out, because again, that's my understanding from using art as a mode of healing.
Yeah, definitely. It's a rule that I like to break quite often, and it's a rule that I think like a lot of people should break whenever they're like starting to create art, because people sit in front of a blank piece of paper and all that anxiety of what to make, all these things, like their brain is just flooding with like all these ideas, and it's like, just start with the line and then go from there. And and I think once you like understand like that can be art, and it's not as it doesn't have to be as anxiety driven as people think making art is. And I think once people let go of that and understand that, then it's like then that's whenever art really becomes the therapy.
Yeah, definitely. You also mentioned expressing yourselves, and that if more people express themselves, then maybe we would have a better, people would have a better grasp on their mental health, and be a little bit more regulated or at peace with themselves too. I think, I mentioned earlier that, it's Black History Month right now. And frankly, right now, we're at a point right now in our society where there's this battle going on in society regarding history and how history is told or even being erased, how some subject matters are being banned in schools and things like that. So I'm wondering a little bit about either how your art or art in general captures either present day or history, and how it continues to tell the true history and true narratives of people.
There's an artist named Theaster Gates, and he's an African-American artist, and I can only describe him as he makes paintings, but I can only describe him as like an archival artist. And so like one of the series of bodies he does is that like his dad had like 6 jobs growing up, right? And one of the jobs he had was tarring roofs. And Theaster Gates talks about, he's like, I remember in the summers of Chicago, so hot, retarring roofs and it being so hot. And my dad literally carrying this like big barrel of tar. And so him and his dad got a whole bunch of like, it's a flash forward to Theaster Gates now. And him and his dad made they call them tar paintings. And so him and his dad made these huge paintings out of tar. And they used all the materials that he was using growing up, tarring roofs with his dad. And another project he did was he met the owner of Ebony magazine, and the owner's daughter, and the owner's daughter gave him, Jet. And the owner's daughter of Jet magazine gave him every issue from the very first issue till the current issue, of every Jet magazine. And now he has that, and like that's a show for him. So he sends that to different museums around the world. And so people went to a place in France. And so French people learned about African American culture via Jet magazines. And so we're in, I think whenever Trump became president, we saw a lot of people step forward. A lot of things got taken back as far as the arts go and as far as like teaching culture goes. But then a lot of people in the private sector stepped forward and started teaching that themselves. And I think that's what's going to happen with this critical race theory subject. And, even though it's not getting taught in schools, the teachers and the students are going to learn it regardless, either from people in their family or going to an art museum and seeing thousands upon thousands of magazines, from a part of African American time period that we can't go back to. And so, but I think like artists are like going to step up, because whenever there's a lack of something, like people usually step up and fill that space, quote unquote. And I think that's what's going to happen.
I hope so, Jonathan, because again, a lot of voices get quieted, and a lot of just current events that people really need to know about are being also censored in many ways. Let me see. So I saw one of your YouTube videos recently, and you talked about a trip you took to Terlingua and about nature and bringing nature to people, which reminded me, and I wasn't quite sure if this was your intent, but it reminded me how there's a lot of people in society, especially people who are marginalized, who don't have access to green space, who don't have access to a park or nature, and also how nature is so healing at the same time, but they don't have access to it. And I don't know if that's where what came up for you, but just when you were telling that story, I was like, oh, that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm initially talking about like everything that falls under the umbrella of people not getting like within nature. Either they don't have access to it, or they can't get to it because of health reasons, et cetera. There's like, all these reasons. And it's really, that trip was so meditative, because it was, I did an art residency out there at a hotel, and it was just like really mind blowing, because it was me and 8 other African American creatives, musicians, writers, painters. And so it was just like this great group of African American people, just talking about everything that was going on. It was right at the pandemic, like right during the pandemic. So it was like it was the summer of August, excuse me. And so there was just so much to talk about. And so the idea was that I wanted to go out there and bring back nature to kind of heal people, because there was so much traumatic, we were looking at so many traumatic things going on social media and the TV. And so I kind of wanted to disrupt the feed, so to speak, in your social media by like bringing you photos of nature and then paintings of nature. And like the idea of like me painting nature is so important that like maybe I should take a second look at it. Maybe there's something that he's putting emphasis on that I should take a second look at, because there's all these things I could paint about. Why paint about nature? Because it's important. It's important for us to try to heal the earth so we can live longer, so we can keep trying to fight the good fight. And it's important for us to like go in our backyard and sit in the grass with our bare feet, and feel that between our toes. Like all that is important. And so that's kind of like what that work is about. Is that like anytime you can take your shoes off and walk in grass, like do it, because I guarantee it'll stimulate something in your brain and release endorphins that like, that are important for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know that you have an upcoming series. Am I correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So the subject matter is like, it's like super important to me, and it was so hard for me to try to figure out like how I was going to approach the conversation. But I really wanted to make some work that dealt with Black Lives Matter and the remember their names. And so I was trying to figure out like how can I start my own conversation about this and like not make it so it's it's like a different way for people to look at their names. And so what I wanted to do was take every name that's on that list and then research them and find out where they're from, and then paint flowers of where they're from, and that be the paintings. So the idea is that, like, for Trayvon Martin's case, like, maybe I find there's flowers in his neighborhood, and so I paint those flowers. And so, like, you kind of, like, I want people to reimagine, like, that imagery of Trayvon, not him running from Zimmerman, but him walking and smelling flowers and being a young child, you know, like, that's what we need to remember that he was. And not like have to recall the 911 phone call to, like, remember him, you know. And so the idea is, like, I want to paint portraits of flowers and then make prints and then send the prints to, or the originals to, the families of the people on the name on the list.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I think you're right. I mean, I think people focus on the more traumatic piece of it, but you want to remember these human beings as beautiful people and who they were, and they were children and they were young and they had their life ahead of them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking about, you know, history and people's lived experiences and healing. What are some last remarks that maybe something we haven't touched on that you would like to communicate to people, since you have an audience right now?
Man, we touch on so much. I guess it's just, I want to just don't get discouraged making art. Keep making it. There's a great Andy Warhol quote where he says, make art and then wait for everyone else to decide whether it's good or not. And while they're deciding, make even more art. So that rule is it's so important to me. And I hope it becomes important to other artists, because it can really help you really find who you are as an artist without the repercussions of, I hope it's good enough, you know, like, let go of that and just make the work and allow it to come to you. And once you allow it to come to you, that freedom of expression becomes a little bit easier and a little bit louder, and that's what we need. Yeah, that's it.
I don't know if you are involved with any organizations in Houston or any schools or anything, but I think your message is so important for a lot of our youth right now, especially when schools are, they tell them to stay inside the lines all the time. And there's so many kids that are painting more like you say, not just literally painting, but, you know, that's how they are. That's who they are. That's how they express themselves. And again, you know, our society tells them, nope, get back in line, inside the line. So yeah, I hope that maybe at some point in your life, or maybe some kids are hearing your message in some way, because I think they need that hope, and that's a lot of the kids that we work with sometimes. So yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, I'm interested, like, if y'all have, you know, kids programming that you would like me to speak to, definitely down with that. You know, it's important to be taught at a young age that you can really do anything, you know, because then it's like, if you don't have any rules, then it's like everything, you know, the world's your oyster, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you found your way. Oh, before we stop, did you want to show us some of your work? We haven't gotten to see any of your work. I was about to close this up here.
Yeah. I have some work from the African Contemporary series. But this work, it's just to get a little idea of where I'm coming from with the work. So I was trying to capture and kind of draw your eye in, because people are so used to looking at contemporary art so much. And so it's like, it's the contemporary part is made for you to kind of notice it and go back and forth. And is that a sculpture? Is that not a sculpture? And eventually, once you read the title, you realize it is a sculpture, and then you kind of re-examine it all together. But yeah, and then this is another work I'm working on. It's a little larger. But yeah, so it's kind of the same series where I'm taking these are indigenous combs. One's from Northwestern Pacific Native American tribe, and then the other one is the African comb. I plan to add like 7 more combs just from different tribes and countries in the world. But yeah, that's my work.
Wonderful. So Jonathan, if people wanted to come and see your work live, is there a place where they could do that?
Yeah, in Houston, I have work at Foltz Gallery, and that's located I don't want to get the address wrong. It's on Westheimer and Shepherd. But yeah, Foltz Gallery, foltzgallery.com is the address. But yeah, that's where they can see my work.
Okay. And what about social media? You have social media presence that they can visit
absolutely. You on? Yeah, I'm on Instagram. It's just my name, Jonathan Paul Jackson. On Instagram is how to find me.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining me and sharing your amazing work and your amazing story. I do want to remind everyone to visit Jonathan's work at the studio that he mentioned and on the social media channels, and also support his work as well as you can, as well as other local artists who also have a lot to communicate as well. I'd also like to remind everyone that if you are hurting from life experiences or want to get involved to eliminate social injustices, please connect with YWCA or an organization that's doing some of this work. If you want to keep the conversations going, we also offer monthly dialogues on issues of racism and discrimination. And our next one is on Friday, February 25th, 12 to 1:30. And the topic is going to be acknowledging history honestly. Once again, thank you, Jonathan.
I have one more thing.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry. One of my favorite Austin artists, Kel Brown, actually has a show at the Austin Public Library downtown. It's a very, very great show. Kel Brown, Austin Public Library downtown. He's in the gallery that they have there. Yeah, go check it out. It's up for a while, so definitely go check out his work.
Wonderful. I'll try to find that and put it in our chat and on the Facebook.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good day.
You too.